What is an idea? An idea is something that can be born in your mind, but, unfortunately, will never materialize and see the light if you don't take any action towards it. Today we will tell you about a person who proved through hard work that an idea, with immense desire, can become a reality, emerging into the world as the fruits of immense self-belief and strength. Our hero was born on February 24, 1955, and his life didn't start off smoothly. Even in his early childhood, his biological mother rejected him and put him up for adoption. However, the boy didn't remain without a home for long, and after some time, he found a new family. He was adopted by the couple Paul and Clara Jobs, who, unable to have children of their own, decided to adopt and raise him as their own. Upon joining the new family, Clara and Paul named their adopted son Steve. Surprisingly, Steve showed exceptional talent from a very young age, combining incredible adventurousness, curiosity, and an amazing exploratory potential. As time passed, Steve grew up like any other boy. But closer to the age of 12, he and his new parents started noticing his strong inclination towards electronics. One day, he expressed his desire to help his physics teacher by assembling an electric current frequency sensor for the classroom. For many, these might be just a set of incomprehensible words, especially in adulthood, but even then, Steve showed interest. The only challenge he faced was the lack of necessary components. Most of us would have abandoned the idea, but not our hero. The boy found a rather unconventional solution. Using the phone book, he simply called William Hewlett. Perhaps many of you, upon hearing this name, understand. The person on the other end of the line was the CEO of the well-known company HP. Can you imagine? A 12-year-old boy didn't hesitate, gathered courage, and called someone who could easily dismiss him and end the conversation without even listening. However, Steve managed to impress William. After a 20-minute conversation, he sent a driver to the boy with all the necessary components, finding their dialogue quite entertaining. Closer to summer, Steve went to HP for an internship at the personal invitation of William. In school, he found a like-minded friend with whom they pursued their common interest. Electronics brought them together in a shared endeavor where both Steve's, Jobs, and Wozniak could spend hours soldering something. Later, they attended lectures and underwent joint training at HP. After finishing school, Wozniak joined the company as an engineer. Anyone who loves their work immerses themselves in it wholeheartedly, devoting their soul, all their strength, and time, dreaming about something. Wozniak dreamed of creating his own personal computer. Jobs, on the other hand, took a different path and didn't want to associate himself with the company where his friend worked. He joined Atari, but as a video game designer. However, the boy's enthusiasm quickly faded. Our Steve decided to leave, simply abandoning everything. Choosing the path of enlightenment, he traveled to India with his hippie friends. As he later said, those were the days when everything becomes unbearable, and you want to buy a one-way ticket and disappear. To disappear from everyone. It was a period of rebirth, vital for new strength and fresh ideas. Wozniak stayed in the United States, becoming one of the founders of the Homebrew Computer Club, known only among radio amateurs. But Wozniak's efforts were not in vain. In 1975, Wozniak created what he had long sought. The first prototype of a personal computer was proudly demonstrated by the company with which he had been associated since school. Unfortunately, and to his immense disappointment, things did not go as planned, and his brainchild was not approved. This greatly saddened Wozniak, but he tried not to give up and turned to Atari, where his friend had once worked as a designer. To even greater disappointment, the company also rejected Wozniak, considering his invention unprofitable and unlikely to bring in profits. As recalled by Wozniak himself, people always have a tendency to doubt something new. His invention at that time was no exception. Faced with failure due to the simple fear of people preferring stability that brings a steady income and rejecting innovations, Steve Wozniak found himself at a dead end. Naturally, he couldn't work in those companies anymore, as he saw no point in it. The product of several years of work was simply ridiculed. It's unknown how events would have unfolded further, but at that very moment, when Wozniak was crushed and humiliated, our prodigal son and hippie in one person returned from India. Of course, the first thing he did was visit his friend Wozniak, who then told him about his successes along with the failure of their brainchild. That evening, they pondered for a long time, analyzing all the options, and finally, gathering courage, Jobs suggested going their own independent way by founding their own company. It was then that the unknown guys from the outskirts began a new path in their lives. And, as it would turn out many years later, it was the path to success. On April 1st, 1976, Steve, reflecting and recalling India, listed various name options with friends at his home. Since Jobs had taken up an Apple diet upon returning from India, he suggested naming the company Apple. Jobs' genius didn't disappoint. He clearly understood that the first letter in the name would guarantee them a higher position than Atari in the phone book. Since the internet was not discussed at that time, the telephone directory served as the conduit between people and companies. It was also during this time that the company's first logo was invented, depicting Newton sitting under an apple tree. But all this was only on paper. A product, the crowning achievement of their creation, was needed. And so, the first product became Wozniak's development of the first personal computer, the same one that HP and Atari had successfully rejected. Apple I, as it was called, was the first serious sacrifice and investment by Jobs, for which he sold his beloved van. In the end, the guys had $1,300 in their hands, which became a very important and useful investment in the company's very first product. You have to start somewhere, and most importantly, if you're going to start, it certainly shouldn't be under an open sky. At that moment, the team had no alternatives, so they decided to choose Jobs' residential space as the first place. Steve was living with his parents at the time, and Clara Jobs didn't stand aside. She even joined her son's team, performing the duties of a secretary who answered calls, adding prestige to their company and giving the appearance of a serious organization. Every company is an endless struggle with competitors. Our trio faced its first competitor, Altair 8800. It was assembled manually, with toggle switches for entering commands. The answers received were a subsequent combination of lights on the front panel. The more complex the task, the more switches were needed. Sometimes the number of switches reached 100 or more. In case of an error, the user received inaccuracies in calculations, and then everything had to start from the beginning. But in those times, such a computing machine was ideal for scientists and those who wanted to touch the future. Apple I had an advantage over the competitor, at least by having a keyboard for input and a display to observe the results. As funny as it may sound, one of the first Apple I prototypes was assembled on Steve's lap right in his bedroom. No serious machinery, simulation equipment, or other gadgets. Bedroom, hands, mind, and imagination, that was the entire range of our geniuses. But where to sell this marvel of a device? It was then that they encountered their first difficulties. No one wanted to buy their innovation. Whichever store they took their product to, everyone refused, and only one salesperson in a small store agreed to take the product only for resale. Surprisingly, the novelty sold out in just a week. It was then that the guys realized that they needed more space for production. The decision was made to move to Jobs' garage. The Apple I computer was sold for $666.66. This figure was not chosen randomly, it was Wozniak's kind of leap. But in all sales matters, Jobs was the main man. The first 100 computers were sold to local customers, providing Apple with a substantial contribution to its initial budget. However, for the company's production to grow, new funds were desperately needed, and Jobs took charge of this as well. Wozniak and the team, to a greater extent, were focused on production and the technical side of the project. Everything related to money and promotion relied solely on Jobs. There were moments when Jobs was ready to give up. The production came close to shutting down because there was no source of funding. Jobs even stopped communicating with people, spending days in his room, calling all banks in search of funds. However, everyone, without exception, declined. But when hope was almost lost, Steve managed to find the right person who became an investor, adding $92,000 to the budget and an additional $250,000 through a credit line from Bank of America sometime later. The growing success was palpable, and each team member was satisfied with the progress. Jobs was extremely proud of how the implementation of each idea was progressing. Wozniak finally had his hands untied. Nothing hindered him from leading all the most desired developments and immersing himself completely in his favorite work without budget constraints. In 1980, Apple II was introduced. The upgrade included a color display, and Wozniak also added a Disk 2 controller, a simple DOS, and a file system. The new Apple II made a splash. This model made the company and its owners millionaires, finally paving the way for the company to go public on the American Stock Exchange. However, life is unpredictable. Where there are highs, there are also lows. In 1981, Wozniak's plane crashed during takeoff. Incredibly, he survived, but rehabilitation forced him to halt developments for a full 2 years. The reason was that Wozniak suffered from amnesia and remembered absolutely nothing about what he had been doing before. Jobs, after the incident, did not rush to return to work. Instead, he decided to pursue education under a fake pseudonym. However, in 1983, he returned to the company, where he resumed working on innovative projects. The issuance of shares marked not only a new stage in the company's development, but also discomfort for Jobs. This was because, by nature, Steve was a leader, but since the working capital was borrowed, the board of directors suppressed the sense of a leading figure and acted as owners. The brilliant founder of the company remained just one of the managers. The most important and distinctive trait of Steve was his insanely powerful energy, capable of motivating a circle of people interested in a common cause. He inspired and communicated all his ideas to everyone. Steve constantly aspired to a leading position, which led him to success in the Macintosh project. The project made him an idol for many engineers, employees, and everyone involved in the industry. Once, the girlfriend of Bill Gates himself mentioned that even he acquired a Macintosh and actively used it. The growing ideology of Steve, with a tremendous desire to create a flawless product, exerted immense pressure on the entire team. He extracted the maximum from each person, pushing them to their limits. He was completely focused on work and success. He spent nights in his office to save time on commuting from home in the morning. The tension and competition in the market were growing, and Jobs came up with the idea of hiring former Pepsi director John Sculley as the head of Apple. He was a successful top manager who had proven himself as an excellent marketer. However, this idea turned out to be a mistake, introducing a competitor into the company who not only disagreed with Jobs in terms of management but also, at his instigation, in 1985, the board of directors decided to fire Jobs. After Jobs left the company, things were not going so bad. The presence of Steve's remaining developments, followed by 12 years of developing and promoting their own operating system, allowed the company to stay afloat. The rapid decline in stock prices became a serious problem for the company. People even argued about which current tech giant would acquire the remnants of the well-known company. During this time, Steve was not idle either. He directed all his efforts towards promoting his new venture, the company Next, whose goal was to develop its own operating system and create computers with a focus on scientific activities. You might be surprised, but at that time, Pixar itself was under the management of our genius. It was during this period that the studio released hits like Toy Story and Monsters Incorporated. Steve's efforts and the productive activities of top management brought the company to unprecedented heights, and on December 20th, 1996, Apple decided to acquire Next for a whopping $429 million. Just think about those numbers. But with one condition: This purchase would automatically bring Jobs back to the company as the CEO. Under his leadership, a major staff cleanup and the elimination of outdated developments began. He never let go of the thought that if he hadn't been fired from Apple, he would never have experienced the new rise and development in conditions where you can't be sure of everything. It was a wonderful experience, providing an understanding of how to approach success. The first iMac appeared and was introduced to the world on August 15, 1998. Right after that, the well-known OS X was developed. A year later, the world was introduced to the iBook, which had the design of the iMac. If you look at it now, it looks quite strange, but at that time, it was a top-notch innovation for the company. The revolution in music occurred in 2001 when the world was introduced to the first iPod and the opening of the Apple Store. The player became the best-selling thanks to its design, compactness, and user-friendly controls. Following the player in 2003, the iTunes Store was introduced. Jobs was the first to suggest buying music individually, with the ability to listen to it anytime on the computer and on the iPod. It was clear to everyone then technology was reaching a new level, providing a new experience in using technology. Steve changed the input and interaction paradigm by introducing touch input. And here we are, approaching the most significant moment in the brand's history. The 2007 presentation, where the world was introduced to the very first iPhone. Unprecedented breakthrough, a couple of touches, and you have access to any necessary function. This presentation to this day is an icon of oratorical art, demonstrating Steve's talent. A year later, in 2008, the MacBook Air was introduced. Thin, light, fairly autonomous, and at the same time, with a sturdy body featuring the well-known hinge that allows you to open the laptop lid with just one finger. Steve wasn't going to stop there, and already in 2010, the first presentation of the iPad took place. August 2011 became the day when the company became the most expensive in the world. Only such an achievement allowed Steve to announce to the world about stepping down from his position. He achieved everything one could wish for. He handed over his position to Tim Cook, who became the chairman of the board. As of today, Apple is the market leader on all continents. In just one quarter of 2019, Apple's revenue was $64 billion, and there is hardly anyone on the planet who does not know this brand. Steve Jobs and his creation show the world that nothing is impossible, and no matter how difficult and thorny the path to the goal is, it can be achieved if you devote yourself to the dream. In 2003, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, but even in such a condition, he dedicated most of his time to his beloved work. Steve died around 3 p.m. on October 5, 2011, at his home in California due to respiratory arrest. He died surrounded by loved ones, his wife, children, and sister. According to his family, Jobs passed away peacefully, and his last words, spoken a few hours before his death, were, "Oh, wow," which translates to wow. Learning the story of this man, it's hard to imagine that an ordinary guy named Steve Jobs could become an icon of oratorical art and a genius of his generation for millions of people worldwide. All the most brilliant things are initially born in our heads. And then there's a big question about what each of us will do to turn these dreams into reality. Friends, share your opinion on how you personally feel about this person and his creation in general. See you soon.